Hello, I'm Brenda Rosen, and I'm President and CEO of Breaking Ground. And I'm thrilled to be here today to introduce Betances Residence, our newest supportive housing in the Bronx. It also happens to be our first passive house project. Breaking Ground was founded in 1990 to renovate the then dilapidated Times Square Hotel into what is now the largest supportive housing residence in the country with 652 studio apartments. And over the last 31 years, we've grown considerably. Today, Breaking Ground owns or operates 25 transitional and permanent housing sites, representing almost 4,500 units of housing, with another nearly 1,000 units in development. We also provide street outreach services across Brooklyn, Queens, and a large area of Midtown Manhattan. Our teams are on the streets 24/7, working with people who are experiencing homelessness and connecting them with services and with housing. Housing is the key to ending homelessness for every individual, but equally important are the supportive services in each of our buildings. With case management, mental health, and primary medical care, and other services on site, our tenants have helped from day one. We also bring in things like yoga and meditation, arts programming, gardening, resume help and job placement, healthy cooking on a budget. We know that our model works. More than 98% of people who enter our supportive housing from homelessness remain in housing. Breaking Ground has long embraced great design because we believe everyone deserves a home and pride of place. When we first moved into new construction, sustainability was at the front and center. We were among the first supportive and affordable housing developers to embrace LEED, Energy Star, and Enterprise Green certifications. And we're taking another leap forward with Passive House at Betances. With 152 units of supportive housing for seniors, Betances brings a model of sustainable, affordable housing to the South Bronx, a community that has faced environmental and economic inequities for decades. This project also pushes us further towards a goal of net zero emissions in our newly constructed housing. Homelessness and climate change are two crises we cannot ignore, and we're proud that Betances is leading the way on both fronts. So thank you again for joining us today. And now I'm delighted to hand it over to Alyssa and Adam for a deep dive into the design and into the details. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alyssa Winselberg, the Director of Design and Construction at Breaking Ground. As an architect, I consider myself very lucky to have had the opportunity to participate in building sustainable and beautiful buildings at the same time as working towards reducing homelessness in our city. After becoming a certified passive house designer 7 years ago, I'm delighted to finally shepherd our first passive house project to completion. But before we talk about Betances, I would like to introduce you to who we are and what we do. We're committed to good design and a high level of sustainability. Why is good design so important to us? Tenants take pride in living in a beautiful building. The community takes pride in hosting a beautiful building as it strengthens it. If you create an uplifting environment, you improve people's lives by enhancing their perception of their surroundings. Why is sustainability so important to us? We operate and manage our buildings. We have limited funding and resources, so we need to focus on making our buildings as energy efficient as possible. Over the years, we've committed to a high level of sustainability to reduce energy costs and our carbon footprint. Our mission is to produce great buildings, strengthening individuals, families, and communities by developing and sustaining exceptional supportive and affordable housing. And what we mean by exceptional is not what is typical, not what is expected. Good design that promotes community acceptance, utilizing a high level of architectural talent, producing a highly sustainable quality building as we are in it for the long haul. As Brenda mentioned, this is our 31st year. We started by converting the Times Square Hotel on 43rd Street and 8th Avenue to the largest supportive housing residence in the country. Our earlier projects were primarily residential conversions of former SRO hotels in Manhattan. The Skirmahorn, our first foray into new construction, broke ground in 2006, 15 years ago. We do street outreach in Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. We provide some transitional housing and drop-in centers, but we primarily build permanent supportive housing where all of the tenants have rent-stabilized leases. We provide social services to all of our tenants. All of our buildings have on-site social services. We manage the buildings and partner with social service providers. We house the chronically homeless, mentally ill, veterans, seniors, youth at risk of homelessness, people with HIV/AIDS, and low-income folks. Providing supportive housing is far less expensive than caring for people on the street. It saves the cost of EMS, emergency room visits, psychiatric hospitalizations, and incarcerations. I'm always asked who pays for our building projects. It requires cobbling together many sources of funding. A typical project will have federal, city, and state funding, each with its own regulations and requirements, the largest source being low-income federal tax credit equity. The buildings that we build don't cost any more to build than other supportive housing projects. However, supportive housing is a more expensive building type than other multifamily housing, as there is more plumbing and electrical work due to the higher proportion of smaller units with more kitchens and baths. As you can see, we have complex building program requirements. Our usual tenant split is 60% formerly homeless and 40% affordable, tied into the area median income. We have a heavy emphasis on security. Our security desk provides eyes on the street, and we often have a nonprofit tenant space to activate the street. We've been providing microstudios for 31 years. We're allowed to provide them in our new buildings as our projects are classified as community facilities with sleeping accommodations under Use Group 3 of the New York City zoning resolution. The mini studio size has increased significantly over the past 10 years. New York City's supportive housing design guidelines and enforcement of federal ADA regulations have changed, requiring larger bathrooms and kitchens. The downside is that the larger the unit size, the fewer units we can fit in a building, the fewer people we can house. Our older buildings are LEED certified, and our newer buildings are certified by Enterprise Green Communities, and now we're building to the Passive House standard. You can see some of our sustainable features. On the upper left is the building management system that we used on earlier buildings that were master metered. The tenant uses their access card to swipe in, turning on all non-essential electrical devices in their apartment. When they swipe out, it turns them off. Other common features in our buildings include green roofs, drought-tolerant planting, recycled materials, renewable energy, and high-efficiency boilers. We have always commissioned our mechanical systems and monitor energy usage across our portfolio. We insist on mock-ups and testing of wall systems. Our energy consultants and contractors perform blower door tests early and often. We train our operations staff on how to operate all of our building systems efficiently. We contract our energy consultant to produce a green operations manual as well as a green residence manual. It is really helpful to recommission our buildings after the project has been occupied for a year. And as you can see, we also test the quality of our stainless steel sinks. Some of the things that make our building special are the materials we use. We build contextual buildings with high quality materials and construction. We give our tenants a safe space to enjoy nature in an urban environment. Whether for tenant relaxation or purely for energy conservation and stormwater retention, we provide green roofs in all of our buildings. We require that natural light be provided in corridors, lobbies, and public spaces. And now a short survey of some of our buildings. Our first new construction project was the Skirmahorn, located in downtown Brooklyn. The architect was Enniad. The Actors Fund is our partner on this project, which includes a 200-seat black box theater. The low-income tenants are primarily related to the entertainment industry. The flat plate concrete building sits on 4 steel trusses atop a subway tunnel. As it required a lightweight facade, the architect chose to use channel glass on the front and a cement board rain screen at the rear. The storefront space activating the street houses the Brooklyn Ballet School. The project is actually part of a larger development site. The developer of the adjacent luxury townhouses gained additional floor area, and we obtained the land for free. The Brook is located near the Hub in the South Bronx. The architect is Alexander Gorlin. This is one of our first brownfield sites. The location was in a particularly difficult high crime area when we started the project. There has been much development since, including 2 of our own projects, La Centrale and our passive house, Betances project. The Hegemon is located in Brownsville, Brooklyn. It was our first collaboration with CookFox. It is a block and plank building, as are most of our buildings, with a contextual brick facade. There's a large landscape courtyard with recycled concrete pavers, green screen fencing, and drought-tolerant planting, as well as a community garden. We usually try and avoid building deep cellars to minimize foundation costs. All of this building's common office and mechanical spaces are located at the cellar level, the lobby slightly below grade. You ramp down to the cellar level to access these spaces. This is a zoning trick that we employ whenever possible, as the cellar space is not counted as floor area, so we can increase our unit count. All of our buildings have multi-purpose rooms that can be divided for different activities, laundries, exercise rooms, computer labs, and bicycle storage. Boston Road is located in the Morrisania neighborhood of the Bronx and was another brownfield site. It is Alex Gorlin's second project for us, and some of the project's funding came from the Medicaid Redesign Team program, housing folks who have high histories of Medicaid usage. The building was more expensive to build than our earlier new buildings due to new requirements for emergency generators for life safety and larger on-site stormwater detention tanks. We completed 2 projects on 1 large site in the Tremont neighborhood of the Bronx, working with CookFox once again. The brownfield site required extensive environmental mitigation, including a subsurface depressurization system. It was our first family affordable project and is an L-shaped building with studio 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, and a supportive housing project with micro studios and space for offices for our scatter site housing program, activating the street. The 11-story L-shaped building on the right is the affordable project, and the 9-story bar-shaped building on the left is the supportive building. They form a U enclosing a courtyard containing required parking for the affordable building, as well as a landscape recreational area. We were fortunate to be part of the winning development team for the Bronx Chester RFP near our Brook Avenue project and the South Bronx Hub. Our 160-unit supportive building is part of a 985-unit mixed-use project sharing a landscape courtyard. The project's architects are the FX Collaborative and MHG Architects. We just completed construction on our second supportive family project located in Brooklyn's Brownsville neighborhood. Ramza is the architect. One of the difficult challenges that face this project is its proximity to an overhead subway line. Finding the right windows necessary to maintain a high OITC rating was a challenge. We ended up using triple glazed windows suitable for passive house standards. The 3,500 square foot storefront space activating the street houses a nonprofit organization, the Power of Two, who coach parenting skills. A few years ago, we purchased the former Jehovah's Witness residence in Dumbo. After going through the ULURP process to change the zoning to allow our tenants to have permanent leases, we started construction in October of last year. We are renovating 491 studio and one-bedroom units, almost all with amazing views. The existing 31-year-old windows happen to be triple paned with integral Venetian blinds and are in excellent condition. We will be adding offices for our management and service provider, as well as tenant common spaces. We are also seeking a tenant for the former commercial kitchen space on the subcellar level. The highest floor, with its 360-degree incredible city views, will house a nonprofit conference center. As you can see, we're going to have our work cut out for us from an energy standpoint in the future, controlling the high-pressure steam boilers. You can see the 1990s building management system. Our next passive house project will be our second senior housing residence. It will also house a community health network clinic. This project, designed by Bernheimer Architects, is currently going through the New York City ULURP process, and it will be our first project in Queens. Now to the project that we want to focus on today. Once again, we were fortunate to win an RFP for a project in the Mott Haven neighborhood of the Bronx with CookFox, this time for 2 connected sites, creating a through-block site, one a New York City Housing Authority site and the other an HPD site. It will house 152 seniors in studio and one-bedroom apartments, and there will be a 5,000 square foot space for DreamYard, a nonprofit providing an early learning center and after-school arts program. We're looking forward to the opportunity for the seniors and the young people to interact. Adam, take it away.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Brenda. I'm Adam Bollier. I'm an associate at CookFox Architects. I've been working on this project since the beginning of design. Let me briefly introduce you to CookFox. We have projects all throughout New York, as well as along the East Coast and into the Midwest. We are probably best known for the Bank of America Tower at 1 Bryant Park. It's a LEED Platinum skyscraper that started back in 2004. More currently, besides many other projects, is the project in this image, which is converting the St. John's Terminal on the west side of Manhattan into a high-performance workplace for Google. It utilizes a double wall facade to manage sun and glare overlooking the Hudson River, and it maintains a portion of the existing railway. For us at CookFox, there are 2 pillars that drive our work: environmental sustainability and social equity. Green spaces, healthy interiors, high-performance buildings are just some of the ways that those principles manifest themselves. For instance, in this image, we try to walk our talk as much as possible. This is from our office. We have 3 terraces. We keep bees. The office is well gold, LEED Platinum. And while work from home has been effective and necessary, I'm looking forward to spending more time back in the office, needless to say. As Alyssa mentioned, CookFox and Breaking Ground have worked together on a few projects before. Breaking Ground has been a great partner, and we've been very fortunate to work on those projects together. The Hegeman is a supportive housing project for formerly homeless individuals in Brownsville, Brooklyn. That's a project where we learned a lot about cost-conscious supportive housing. And that project integrates access to green space, access to daylight, and really makes the building part of the neighborhood. Similarly, a few years later, the pair of buildings in the Webster Residence and Park House in the Bronx, further north than the project we're discussing today, also integrates access to green space, daylights the corridors, integrates healthy interiors. So moving on to Betances Residence. Here's the immediate context of our site. Primarily residential, a variety of scales, single-family houses, multifamily housing, and high-rise public housing, as well as a mixture of commercial and post-industrial buildings as well. Notably, the site is not far from the major Deegan Expressway. That's to the south about 8 blocks. That's worth mentioning, as the South Bronx in general suffers from some of the worst air quality in the city. A couple other factors to mention. The site's a through lot facing on 2 streets, and you'll also notice that the streets have a subtle bend right there at the midpoint where our site is located. Here's the site from the south, a vacant lot. You can see the gap in the street wall that this creates. Similarly, on the north side, vacant and or abandoned site. Though you can notice the variety of scale in the neighborhood. Low-rise residential on the right, 6-story tenement on the left. And then in walking through the neighborhood and getting a sense of scale and architecture, there are some takeaways. Green space. There are yards, front, side, and backyards. There are community gardens, city parks, public housing of the tower in a park typology. Texture and articulation. There's rich brickwork all throughout the neighborhood and the area, with varying levels of complexity, sometimes the simplest being the most compelling. These details picking up shadow throughout the day helps articulating the depth of the facade and changes throughout the day and the year. And then textures making the changes in materials more apparent. Brick, stone, wood, metal, glass. And then scale and proportion. There's a variety of scales here, from, again, single-family homes up to high-rise public housing. That said, there is some consistency to the rhythm of windows and facades on the tenement housing, on the low-rise residential housing. And another item about the change in scale is that it does set up this foreground, background view beyond with green space as the kind of middle ground. Discussing some project goals. Early on, we knew we wanted to pursue Passive House. And returning to the air quality that I mentioned earlier, we knew this is a senior population. Air quality is critical, and providing fresh, filtered air and keeping unfiltered air from infiltrating in is very important for this population. Social equity. The building, especially Passive House building, performs for everyone. And Passive House ensures that comfort is satisfied throughout. So there's no area, not the top floor or corner units, that can be sacrificed on that requirement. And then it's a high performance building set for long-term operation. So reducing energy long-term is a big benefit. Other project goals. We knew we wanted to pursue some additional funding from the state, and NYSERDA Tier 3 is an incentive for buildings that are already high performance to improve beyond that. Enterprise Green Communities. Alyssa spoke a little bit about that previously, but has a kind of wide perspective on sustainability. So water saving fixtures, low VOC materials, etc., are all part of that. And then New York City HPD, which is one of the housing agencies, has active design guidelines, and then using that as a jumping off point to kind of reinforce a healthy, active lifestyle in the building. So that means walkable, appealing, daylit circulation, and that includes vertical circulation. Providing outdoor space and fitness space, you know, and mild effort in the circulation of the building. So setting up some early decisions. Affordable housing in the city here does have something of a playbook in terms of structure, facade, and systems. Many projects presenting at the conference here are doing a very admirable job of going beyond those sort of conventions. Similarly, we knew that to do what we wanted, we would need to find a way to take advantage of as much of the economy of those conventions as possible, while also going beyond them or around them where we could. So a big factor in doing that is working with the GC, Monadnock, early on from the start of design. They have experience with Passive House, experience with affordable housing, and experience with the client. All of that's helpful. And with them, we're able to explore options and get some pricing feedback and some guidance, and that continues right into the construction team. Some of the decisions we were able to make early then stick with block and plank superstructure, go with centralized ERV. It makes maintenance simpler, changing filters, less units, less penetrations in the building, and using a VRF heat pump system is relatively standard operating for this type of passive house. Similarly, UPVC windows, it's kind of a go-to. That said, sourcing them economically, finding products that meet all of the requirements is not easy, and Monadnock deserves some credit in bringing a good product to the project. And also early on, we knew that the facades would be a mix of metal, rain screen, and brick cladding. Into the massing of the building, playing off what Alyssa was saying earlier, we want to maximize the number of units and the amount of area that we have available. And so now that is set primarily by the zoning available for the site, and we're limited in height by that zoning as well. And we need to provide a rear yard that we knew would split the building into two towers. So we have a ground floor that's half a level below grade, like Alyssa was talking about. The challenge in doing that is making sure that ground floor level doesn't feel like a basement, has access to daylight, has access to the street, has access to our green space. And we also knew from our rear yard. We were going to be creating green space to organize the building around, to organize circulation and amenities and views. And we also knew we wanted to connect a view from the street into that garden, tying the community into sort of the heart of the building. Moving into the ground floor and sort of following a typical circulation path. From the south, there's a mild incline to the south entry. Our lobby is glazed on either end, cutting through the building with a view to the garden. And then the amenities are organized around that garden space, the sort of multi-purpose room, the library sitting area, and then the social and medical services also overlooking the garden. The garden itself will have seating areas, benches, and a turf area for future yoga and fitness classes. On the right side of the building, there's a future tenant space for a nonprofit community tenant. That is actually outside of the Passive House boundary for this project based on some other considerations. Moving on to a more typical floor. The units here are a mix of studios and one-bedroom units. There are none of the micro units that Alyssa was talking about before, but these units are organized around that center garden space with views to the green space. It's important to note the corridors at the elevator and stair lobbies have windows on either end, getting daylight into those corridors, views back to the green space. The stairs have a landing on each floor with a window. The stairs themselves have a mild rise run using only 7-inch risers. In the city, we're allowed to go steeper than that for multifamily, but to maintain walkability, this doesn't exceed that. And there's a green roof also on the second floor. There's access with a vestibule from both towers out to that second floor green roof, extensive green roof. There'll be pavers and ramp down to it as well, handrails, etc. Moving up to the roof. The roof is a variety of mechanical equipment, distributed heat pumps, ERVs, generator, and obviously what everyone likes to show off, PV panels. And then taking a section through the building, there's our double height lobby space, pulling the view through the building to the garden and pulling circulation, through. There's the garden, the library space beyond overlooking the garden. The library space itself has a roof only at the first floor. There's a clear story beyond it that's sort of cutting back the massing of the building to maintain access to light down to the garden. You can also see the social service space overlooking the garden. Okay. During design, this is what we hoped the project would look like. And actually, this is pretty much what the project looks like. You can see the simple pattern of windows. It's not unlike the proportion and rhythm of the neighboring tenements and row houses. In terms of materials, there's an emphasis on natural materials. There's brick, which is common to the area. This particular brick is a deep color with a silvery sheen. The metal rain screen is zinc. It has a live patina, and it uniquely changes color with the light during the day. It can be silvery cool or golden warm as the light changes. And very importantly, in this view, you can see in the lower left the lobby space with the view through to the garden. Here's another rendering, also of the South Tower, the massing of the core versus the residential wing, the different materials. And then my colleague Giacomo, who did this rendering as well as the other one, wanted to experiment with what he would call his passive house rendering, in which he managed to very convincingly model snow. And it also looks pretty convincing that the building would be warm and comfortable even in icy conditions. Okay. Speaking of keeping the elements out, here's our typical window at the zinc panel facade. UPVC window installed in the block bearing wall leads us with the potential issue for thermal bridging around the window frame. So to mitigate that, we're extending the insulation and rain screen over a portion of the frame, at the head and the jambs at least. One thing to note is that in order to install this, it means the windows need to be installed before the facade. That's a topic that we'll revisit in discussing the punched windows at the brick facade. In terms of the zinc itself, it's worth noting that we're using corrugated zinc. It allows us to use a thinner gauge material, and we have a horizontal detail at every floor that gives us more tolerance in construction, as the building up and down, in and out, has some construction tolerance, and it aligns with the head of the windows. As I move through the details a little bit, we have some therm modeling courtesy of Stephen Winter Associates. I think this helps illustrate how the insulation helps mitigate that bridge happening right at the edge of the window frame in the rough opening, enough to maintain the comfort criteria inside. Okay, at the brick facade, one of the conventions of this type of building, i.e. masonry-clad affordable housing, is that windows are installed from the interior after the brick is in place. While we explored alternatives with Monadnock, we were looking at big potential impacts to cost. So this included potentially installing brick, then windows, then returning via suspended scaffold to install a metal frame or closure between the window and the brick. Especially with a job that must satisfy prevailing wages, which is basically union designations and wages, it was not economical to do that. Meanwhile, installing windows first, then brick was a non-starter for fear of damage to the windows, and would still require sealing the windows and installing a closure from the mason scaffold. Mixing trades on a scaffold is also probably a non-starter. So, working out a window that could be installed from the interior and satisfy passive house criteria became the exercise. So we started looking at pushing the window out to the back of the brick, more in line with the continuous insulation. And the ways we looked at doing that were with AAC block configurations, various brick returns, many different products and materials to close the inside of the cavity. All of this in steady collaboration with Monadnock and Stephen Winter Associates. So those iterations were crossed off one by one as we worked through them. Some based on just keeping our psi values in check, as they failed based on therm modeling of the conditions. Some based on their capability or deficiency for keeping water out of the building. That is, not just thermal performance and air infiltration. Some for constructability issues, especially sequencing of construction. And finally, availability of products, which turned into an issue that we had to work around. Where we eventually arrived, we move ahead through our details. we're using cool therm insulation to achieve a higher R value per inch, which comes at a cost premium compared to a thicker depth of mineral wool. It minimizes the depth of the cavity and how far we need it to push the window and the brick out. We're using a deeper block at the sill of the rough opening to support more of the dead load of the window. And then we're using fiberglass angles. These are from Smart CI to close the inside of the cavity. Then we needed to sort out sequencing of the air barrier, peel and stick, sealant, etc. So to Monadnock's credit, they provided a mock-up for constructability and also testing. And given the uniqueness of this set of details, that was critical to prove out and streamline the buildability. So nothing says high performance building like some used plywood and garden hose. But that said, this mock-up was very important to sort out that set of details and especially the sequencing, and prove out that this would work for air and water and even dynamic water infiltration. Okay, another item in the crossover of affordable housing economy and passive house performance was the parapet, or lack thereof. Instead of a parapet requiring continuous insulation up, over, and behind the parapet, we were able to use AAC block as a sort of curb to extend support of the facade up to the top of the roof, terminate the roof in a simple coping, and still satisfy the comfort criteria inside. And then with the railing set on thermal block, set back from the edge. And then in the photos, you can see the AAC block going in. Okay. Changing gears a little. The mechanical strategy at the units is pretty straightforward. We knew, based also on Monadnock's guidance, that we wanted to avoid VRF lines in the walls. That said, based on the floor-to-floor height, we couldn't have ceilings in the living area, at least, and in general don't have ceilings to work with. So what results is having the fan coil units above the closets with the runouts over the closets. Ceiling height there is kind of sacrificed. And at the one bedrooms, keeping the fan coil units on either side of the wall between the bedroom and living area. Okay. So for a project still in construction, we can take a bit of a construction walkthrough. Starting with the foundation, with occupied space on the ground floor, slab on grade, and with spread footings. What resulted was a need to have insulation under those slabs and even under the footings. So you're looking at high pressure insulation underneath the footings with some pretty diligent attention to spray foaming the joints between the insulation boards. The structure is relatively straightforward for this building. Something you can note, in the upper left photo, you can see AAC block being used as the brick ledge, where brick on the bulkhead there is going to be coming down and preventing a bridge through the roof right there. Air barrier on concrete block is pretty conventional, but achieving passive house levels of airtightness does take some serious thoroughness. One other thing you can note is that on the left, you can see the windows are already installed in that facade. That's a facade due to get the metal rain screen. And here's some of that metal rain screen going in. That's a thermally broken girt system, lots of mineral wool, and some of those zinc closures going back around the frame of the window. which takes us to current status of the building as of May, as of now. Here is the north tower from the street. You can see the zinc facade. You can see how the bend in the street is picked up in between the two wings of the tower. You can also see how much the color of the zinc changes in the light, depending on the angle. Sort of the more golden color to the right, more of a charcoal color to the left. Here's a view of the south tower, not unlike Giacomo's rendering, albeit with no snow. And then taking a brief walkthrough of the site. Here's the walkway down to the entry. Here's looking towards the future lobby with the view through to the garden. Here's the view in the lobby. That center wall will be clad in wood slats. Here's a view from the garden looking back towards the lobby. The library just to our left. You can see the roof above the library there steps down to keep the light, keep access to daylight in the garden. Moving directly inside, here we are in the corridor between the two towers at the ground floor, with the library just to our right overlooking the garden. Briefly moving up to the second floor, this will be home to a extensive green roof. You can see some of the pavers going in as well as the access from the north tower. One thing worth noting here, you can see some of the brick detailing here playing a little bit off the neighborhood and also playing a little bit off of just how the building is built. Continuous soldier course at the head of every window. And then also at the vertical control joints, there's a stack bond that sets back a little bit, keeps that joint in shadow. Some of the, rhythm and proportion of the windows, again, is not unlike the tenement and row houses in the neighborhood. And then here we are at the roof, where I think most construction walkthroughs end. You can see heat pumps and ERVs, plumbing vents, and of course the trellis for the future PV system. So all of that said, I want to briefly say thank you. Thank you especially to Breaking Ground, to Monadnock, to Stephen Winter Associates, to Dagger Engineering, and to all of the other consultants that have been working hard on this project for the last few years.
All right, thank you, everyone. We had some good Q&A. Yeah, thank you. It's a really great project. If we don't say so ourselves being part of it, sorry. We had some really good Q&A in the chat, and it didn't look like most of you were actually following it. So I'm going to just repeat some of the questions here and let you know what the team answered. So we had a question here that was, what exactly drove Breaking Ground to move forward with passive house buildings? And the answer from the team was that, from Melissa, was that we have a strong commitment to energy conservation. At first, it was difficult to convince the funders to go ahead with a more expensive building, but over time, they became familiar with the benefits of it. And in sort of conjunction with that, I had asked the team if there was any sort of data that shows, let me find, excuse me, I'm going to find this a little tweaky here. I got to find my question. Is there any data from the projects, from this wonderful construction on all of their projects, whether they're passive house or not? It's obviously, there's a huge sense of detail there. And the greenhouse spaces and all of that, those real beautiful amenities, were there any health benefits that they could record, like reduced asthma or anything like that? And the answer was, unfortunately, they don't have any empirical data on the physical benefits, but they have an amazing tenant retention rate. So that probably does confirm part of the story about what it's like to live in these apartments, right? That's usually a really good indicator of how quality the projects are. one of the questions I had for the presenters was, you know, if there's one thing that you guys could tell the Passive House community about what we could do better to make this more replicable and more easily applied to your project. I know it's a rigorous standard, but what's one or two things you would tell the community that you need to continue your successful Passive House journey?
Right. And I think it has a lot to do with funding. And I watched the funding presentation prior to this. And I think, you know, that's like a huge part of it. Another thing is I would like to see all architects take the Passive House training. I don't think everybody's familiar with it, but I think every architect should have to take it. It should be part of, maybe it should be part of the AIA continuing education requirements, because I don't think that everybody, you know, is into it in a way that they should be.
Got it. Thank you, Alyssa. Adam, did you have anything to input on that?
I would follow up on what Alyssa said. I think familiarity is a big factor. I think without going through an entire project and not being more familiar, or, you know, taking the test and everything like that, I think Passive House can seem kind of further out on the extreme, but it's really not that far off from, you know, and it's not that far off, and it's achievable with products that are available and means that are available. Yeah, I think it's just the degree of familiarity going forward.
Great. Thank you, guys. And considering the populations that you work with now, such supportive housing needs and things like that, are there, and it seems to be a great combination with Passive House for comfort and health, what amenity spaces do you see that are evolving into these buildings that are like probably the most necessary, most vital to help the tenants of this type of housing?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with our program spaces. You know, we have exercise rooms in all of our buildings, and I think that's an important space. And in our multi-purpose spaces, we run programs. I think Brenda at the very beginning talked about yoga and cooking and, you know, the kinds of support groups that we provide, and also all of our green spaces, our exterior spaces. I think they're really very important, and we do yoga outside as well as inside. Yeah, I mean, I think that's basic. We also, by the way, have medical facilities in our office areas that are provided by our service providers.
And I think someone asked from the audience, what prompted you guys to go with Passive House for this building to begin with?
Oh, I became certified, what, 5 or 6 years ago, and I really was pushing. And unfortunately, it took a long time, and it was really all to do with funding. You know, I think there was the worry that it was going to be a much more expensive building, which this particular building is not an inexpensive building because it has 2 cores, you know, and 4 elevators and all that stuff. But, you know, it's not that much more expensive in terms, you know, if you equal out, you know, the additional cores. But I think everybody was frightened of it. And I think now you can see that HPD is into it. You know, all of our funding sources are familiar with it. There have been quite a few successful projects. I think, you know, the project that you started with, Lois, and Roosevelt Island was a huge help, you know, and that it just took some of the fear away from developers.
That's great. That's great. And another important question that we get asked a lot, HPD requires enterprise green community or LEED, depending on, you know, which pathway you want to go. And does Passive House cause any conflicts with those certifications? Do we have any things that contradict each other?
I mean, I haven't found that to be true. And I think Thomas actually answered the question on the in terms of, I don't know if Thomas wants to come on and answer it.
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, I would say there isn't a great deal of conflict between EGC and Passive House. EGC is a points-based system that's more holistic. It takes a broader approach to the green building effort, where Passive House is very focused on energy. It's a performance-based standard requiring a detailed energy model and on-site testing and verification. So I'd say EGC does enter into the energy efficiency realm, but Passive House, the requirements of Passive House are more stringent. So there isn't a lot of conflict between those two programs, and they don't really compete with each other.
Well, we're actually required to do Enterprise Green Community as a part of our HPT funding. So, but we haven't found any conflict.
That's great. I know a lot of people in the audience have having trouble with the application. So if there's any questions that you in the audience have wanted to ask, if you want to ask me, I can then repeat it for the group. Does anybody have anything that is a burning question? No? Okay. Any closing remarks from our wonderful development and design team?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a pleasure, and I hope, we hope to be finished in August, September, and start occupying the building then. And certainly we'll do tours, once the building is completed. I look forward to taking people through it.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for your time.